email with the agenda. I'd like to entertain a motion that we approve the agenda for the board training.
I'd like a motion that we approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, first item is educational facilities and ESPLOST board training.
Madam Chairman and Board, I'd like to take this time to introduce a little bit about the topic and then introduce our speaker or trainer for this evening. I think as we're looking at the ESPLOST process and also looking at strategic planning at the same time, it's really important to have a good fundamental knowledge of how the facilities process works on both the state and the local level, because there are several components that have to work together so that a system can maximize its resources and do the best job possible in local facilities planning. And we've got some of that in front of us, some work to do there, and so I thought it'd be an excellent opportunity to use one of our training sessions to bring somebody in to cover that. We've got Mr. Doug Fields with us tonight. He has a wealth of public school experience, but more importantly, he's worked as a state facilities consultant with the Georgia Department of Education, and he also works with us through Pioneer RESA to provide us with guidance on the planning process and the 5-year facilities plan and all of our state requirements. And so when I asked him if he would come join us tonight, he said, absolutely. You name the date and the time, and I'll be there. So if you haven't had any coursework in facilities and some of you are new to the board, I think this will be some, what I call some very good foundation type information for making those decisions. And I'm gonna let Doug decide when we take a break for supper, okay? Because there's some snacks and stuff across the way. So Doug, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir.
Chris and Keith decided they're here with us tonight too, from a facility standpoint, and so we're glad that they came and stayed with us. We all went over the content when we met with Doug, so.
Well, thanks for allowing me to come here. As Dr. Rico said, I worked with the BOE for several years, about 5 years as a facility consultant with them. And then in conversation with Justin Old, and prior to him, the director, we talked about that Pioneer RESA would benefit from having a person that was somewhat knowledgeable and could help school systems work through the facility planning process. So generally speaking, what I do is I work with school systems in developing facility plans. The law requires you to have one of those, and it'd be updated each year. And then I also work with them on the actual process of planning for any kind of facility issues that they have coming up. May it be as simple as someone, I don't usually get in the maintenance area, but I have talked to school systems regarding maintenance issues that they're having. But generally speaking, planning for renovations, modifications, program needs, new construction, and so on like that. It's always included in the facility plan. And it's important in the planning process that we have a broad view of everything that goes on in the facility planning area, because the facility plan itself is a very important document for you as a board, and certainly for the staff as they are working towards providing schools that are safe and adequate for their kids. So it's important, in that respect, it's important that we take advantage of what the state offers to you as a board, as a school system, as far as funding and as far as just their resources they have available to, because they do have lots of resources. They have architects on staff that will provide information and provide expertise to the school systems. But those architects do not actually serve a school system as far as designing schools or designing buildings or all that. You have to go outside for that. Just a little bit about myself. I've done just about every job that you can have in the school system. I was a teacher, classroom teacher. I coached basketball, football. Well, I started to say soccer, but I can't say that I really coached soccer. I traveled with the team a good bit, but I didn't. I don't know if they knew more about it than I did. But I was an assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and I studied with Dr. Rayfield, that's where I stopped. I saw what superintendents were going in through, and noticed that the average tenure of a school superintendent was about 3.5 years. And I said, I don't think I want to go there. And so I went with the DOE instead, and got some valuable experience working with a lot of superintendents, even the past 3 that you've had here. So I've been with Union County for quite a while. I told one of the ladies, or a couple of ladies down the hall here a while ago, I said, I grew up partially in Union County. And they said, how did that happen? I said, because in Lumpkin County, it seemed like we were in Union County every week doing something. Union County was the only school system in our area that had a track. You had a paved asphalt track up here on top of the hill, and we came over here to that track in the spring at least once a week, it seemed like. And I ran a lot of laps around that track. And even accused one of your former superintendents, the basketball coach, name slipped my mind, guys. Earl Odom. I even accused him one time of shooting me in the back with a blank pistol. But we had a good time up here and got to know a lot of good friends. Tommy Aaron, not Tommy Aaron, but
Steve.
Aaron guy that played basketball, tall, Danny Aaron, and some of those guys. I played basketball with them in college, so I've been around and through Union County for a lot of years. So that's where I am. Facility planning is important, but what we want to do to start off with is I have given each one of you 3 little sticky notes. And what I want you to do to start off the training is I want you to write down either one word or just a couple of words that you might think of that you think applies with facility planning. What's important to you as an individual, and what do you think is important to the school system. And when you finish, just stick them up on the top so we can address those as time goes by. I actually have in the past had board members build something. I'd bring a wide array of junk, I guess you'd say, art supplies, as my wife calls them, and let them build something, and then ask them about what they went through in doing that. And it'd be interesting what you saw built, first of all, and then you'd be also interested in some of the thinking that went through it. What we're going to talk about as you finish up your notes is on this first slide. We're going to talk about facility planning itself. We're going to talk about capital outlay. We're going to talk about entitlement and application process, how to plan effectively. Then we're going to go over your plan that you have in place here and talk about what's in it and just give you some finer points of those things. Then we'll spend a little bit of time to talk about each one of your buildings, what you have on here at this particular point is recognized by the state. And then we'll wind up with talking about the ESPLOST a little bit, because I know that you're going to be soon looking to renew or at least put that on the ballot for the future. So we'll talk about that very generically, I might add, but something to, just some thoughts to go with. Have either one of you built a house recently? New home? You're lucky. You gentlemen are lucky.
I built one 8 years ago. Remodeled a little bit.
What goes into planning for a remodeling or construction of a new home?
Stress.
Yes, very much so.
Your budget, what you can afford versus you want to build the most you can for the least amount of money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Location, view.
Yeah,
Well, if you're gonna do an addition, will it fit on the existing structure?
right. Will it be supported by the structure you have? Will it fit not only structurally wise, but will it fit aesthetically wise? We're in the process of building a sunroom on the back of our house, and it has been more than I thought it was going to be, to make it fit with the rest of the house and so on like that. But it is stressful. You have to talk about your budget. What can you really afford? Can you, and like myself and my wife accused me, I've got $1 million budget on a McDonald's income. So what can you actually build? You know, what can you do? We built our dream home in Lumpkin County about, in 2002. About 4,000 square feet on a big piece of property. And we built a house for just over 200,000. We sold it in 2012, and we were gonna build back something try to build back something similar in Forsyth County. There was just no way. Not for $200,000 could we build that same house. The cost of materials had gone up, the cost of property had gone up, the finishings had gone up. Concrete had gone from 2002 at about $60 a yard to right at $100 a yard. So all those things become important as far as your budget goes. But what's important is that as you work through that as a husband and a wife, or a school system, as you work through that part of your budget, your planning, you start to match those things up. What can we do? We might have to do some value engineering, but this is important to me, but maybe we can do less here. Maybe we can, instead of having hardwood floors, maybe we back off and go with carpet, or a laminate or something like that. Instead of granite countertops, maybe we go with laminate or something like that. But you do what you have to do in the planning process. As a school system, you do the same thing. You go through that planning process, you know how much money that you have sitting out there in your budget that you can set aside for this process, and then you start to plan accordingly. And you do that effectively by doing value engineering, hopefully before the plan starts. We can afford this, we can afford that. But even before we get to that point, we need to know what's available to us as far as funds, and what the state allows, what their guidelines are, and that's what capital outlay planning is all about. The history of capital outlay was started in the 80s. Now, you guys are all young, so you don't remember how did school systems build schools before then?
Bonds.
Bonds, absolutely. A GO bond, and you know what that means. These folks out here they don't want to even talk about a GO bond, because that's going to increase their taxes. I wouldn't want to talk about it either. I live in Forsyth County, and we do GO bonds down there. And it gets pretty painful sometimes. Our millage rate down there is getting close to 18 or 19 mils. And so it's, I understand up here it's about 11. I told them, I think I want to move back up here. But it's, before the 1980s, you had to have government bonds, or not government bonds, but general obligation bonds. Or you went through the State School Building Authority, which you probably don't even know what that is. There was a group in Atlanta called the Georgia School Building Authority, and if you needed a school building, you had to apply to them to demonstrate that you actually needed a new school building. And then they sold the bonds. And they actually owned the building until you got it paid for. And it was like maybe 20 years or more before you could get it paid for through your property tax and through your contribution. But that's the way it happened. But in the 80s, I guess it was Joe Frank Harris along in those years that decided that school systems needed something to do to help them to handle the issues of school buildings and construction. So they come up with a law that says, the next part of the slide says, to assure that every public school shall be housed in a facility which is structurally sound, well-maintained, and has adequate space and equipment to meet each student's instructional needs. Now, the state has their idea of what that means. But the state's idea of what that means, and your school system and your public may have a whole different idea. It's like a state law. A state law can be much more stringent than a national law, a federal law. The federal law has a basic blueprint of what a law should be, but the state can do differently if they choose to, as long as they meet the minimum. Okay? So this is the case here. The state DOE has guidelines and rules that you have to follow to make sure that your school will fit this, this definition. But your definition is completely different, because what's adequate in Union County may not be adequate in Gwinnett County. And what is adequate in Union County may not be adequate in Towns County. You're serving over 2,000 or close to 3,000 students in this system. Towns County's got 1,100, give or take a few each year. So adequate is very important to you as you start to plan. What do you want the students of Union County to attend school in? What kind of classrooms? What kind of auxiliary things that is something that you want them to have? I thought it was a very, very good idea and a good project when you built the ag facility here in this county. Because, and I didn't realize there was so much agriculture that went on here, but there is. I've driven around the county and I see all the farms and so on like that, and this county needed a place like that. And it was important that you have it because it gives an opportunity for your kids and your neighbors' kids to be able to do the things that they're going to grow up doing and have a good experience at it. So what is adequate? I work with two school systems in further northeast of here. And particularly one of them had a gym built in the 60s. And their high school was built about the same time. And so we had started the conversation about that particular facility, whether it was adequate for their school or not. The gym, everybody in the county says, this gym's adequate. This is a gym that, well, it was huge. It seated 2,500 to 3,000 people. It had chair back seats all around it, and it had a great floor, a great place to watch basketball from. And so they were very satisfied with that and said it was very adequate for their needs at that particular time, and will be for several more years. The high school, but on the other hand, had hallways that was about as narrow as this one out here. The classrooms were less than 600 square feet, and they had no wiring in the building that would handle all the technology that's required nowadays. They didn't have offices, they didn't have special ed suites. Well, matter of fact, most every room was a special ed suite because they were so small. And they were, these kids, you know, when you and I went to school, we had a 6'3" kid on our basketball team. We thought that was huge. Now, you guys had Danny Aaron, 6'7", and he was huge. But nowadays, kids are bigger, and they're growing them bigger every day, it seems like. So a hallway like that cannot hold 800 kids in a class change. And the classrooms are so small, and the things, the equipment they had to use was not adequate for them. So they made a decision, we're gonna keep that gym, which is adequate, we're gonna build a new high school. And so they built it with wider halls, bigger classrooms, more technology. Each classroom now got a workstation for the teacher. They don't have a teacher's desk like it was when you and I went to school, with the teacher sat up front, you know, and lectured and sat there. Most of the time, that don't happen in classrooms today. Now there's much more action in the classroom, more activity. And so they had the teacher over here on the side, out of the way. And they expect that teacher to be up and moving, which we all do. So adequate is important. And when you talk about adequate, and you want your kids, I don't know if you got kids, school-age kids or not, but how do you want them to go to school? Do you want them to have just the bare minimum? Or do you want them to have something that they can do their best learning in? So you make that decision, what is adequate. I can't make that decision for you. Your staff and you are going to have to make that decision over time. And that's what's important in planning. And so when you start your planning process for new or existing facilities, you start thinking about first thing, is it safe? Is it structurally sound? And we know it's well maintained, but is it adequate for what the learning experience that we want our kids to have? That's very important. And that's something that comes from my heart, because I was an administrator and I have grandkids now, and I want them to have the best they can have. Because if it's not adequate, that they cannot learn, you know, in the best they can learn, that school's going to be put back in the back burner for them. So as you start your planning, focus on adequate. Not adequate size, but adequate everything else. Not just the size of the room, the size of the hallway, the size of the classroom, but all the technology and all the other things that goes with it. What's good for them? Well, once this law became effective or passed, then it had to be funded. You know how that goes. And you know that there are always unfunded things in the state legislature. This was an unfunded mandate for a few years, but then they did go, I guess Joe Frank Harris was governor, they said, yo, we're gonna fund this thing. And so they set aside $300 million of credits. Now I say credits because it's not money until you make it money. And you make it money by making an application to the state, and the state sells bonds that you don't pay back, by the way. The state pays them back through property taxes, but it's not just your property taxes, it's the state's property tax. So you'll never write a check to the state, you'll never see a difference in your property tax, but it all pays for the buildings that you have. Now, your system has done a great job over the years. With a practically new middle school, your high school's only a few years old, older than that. You have the Performing Arts Center, you have a new gym over there, and all those things have been paid for. At least a portion of those things have been paid for out of that $300 million of credits that's been turned into cash for your school system. Okay, and at this particular point, you have no bond indebtedness. You have no, you don't even have an advanced funding on your entitlement at this particular point, which is not a bad thing, but it's sometimes happens. So you've done a great job, your staff's done a great job at this particular point of funding what you need as you go, without debt. Because you know debt means you take a portion of what your budget is, just like at your house, if you have a mortgage, part of your budget is going towards paying that interest on the house. And that's very, very painful. And when it you're paying a few $100s a month of interest on your house, a school system will pay thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you don't want to get involved in there unless you absolutely have to. The state legislature funds this program at one of those levels, 100%, 80%, 60%, 40%, or 0%. In other words, it doesn't have to happen every year. I've been involved in facility planning for over 10 years. There's only one time that they have funded at less than 100%, and it was done at 80% that year. And the reason we had 80% that year is because that was along about the same time that the federal stimulus package came out, which didn't turn out to be very good, but that's when it was. So this year, as far as I know, the legislature has passed the budget, and it was funded 100%. Out of that facility planning piece of that law becomes a requirement that your school system has a 5-year facility plan. It's renewed every 5 years. And that's kind of a misnomer now because Chris and Keith will attest that we don't renew it every 5 years, we renew it every year. And the state renews it every year. We're going to talk about that in a little while, that entire plan and how it's done. But your facility plan is actually updated each year, but you have to go through this elaborate process about every 4 years to get it approved through the state in the end. And you bring in a facility team, and they walk through your buildings and talk about how great it is, and write you a glowing report, and it gets approved. But that facility plan is a very, very important document, and it's gotten to be more important over the last few years as we went online now with everything. Because when I first started doing facility planning, we had these big books that you did your facility plan in. Dr. Rayfield probably remembers those, and I know Keith does. I don't know about Chris. That's maybe before his time. But you had this big book that was probably this size or bigger, and we did the facility plan on paper. And so we'd bring in the facility team, and there'd be like 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 of those books that laying out there. The state would take one, the superintendent would get one, the facility director would usually get one, the state consultant would get one, and we had these big old books that nobody ever looked at. You know, you talk to most every superintendent back in those days, and they'd say, "Where's your facility plan?" and call their secretary, where's that facility plan? You know, that big old notebook that we have? They didn't know what was in it. And it really didn't mean a whole lot unless you were a Gwinnett County or a Forsyth County and you were building a lot of schools. Because you kept that thing out there because you had to base your application on what was in the book. So they would look at it pretty often, but most school systems never knew where they were. As a matter of fact, my first superintendent I worked for, he didn't have a clue. He didn't know what it was. What is that? What are you talking about? He asked me when I asked him about it. So, but now it's online, and so that plan becomes very, very, very important because you have to update it each year, and if you don't update it each year, then they don't give you your entitlement. And that entitlement is very important. And so that's part of my job in working with school systems in Pioneer Region District is make sure that we got ours updated and out there well before the deadline, which was April 15th. I think it was. It actually was like 17. But it's that time of year. So if you want to, we're going to show it to you in a minute, and you're going to be able to, well, you won't, I don't guess you guys will be able to actually log on and look at it on a regular basis, but your staff has access to it daily, anytime they want it. Okay? The DOE established rules and guidelines to determine what they say is safe and adequate. For example, a high school classroom, the minimum size, their rule is that it has to be 600 square feet. Now, 600 square feet in your house, if you had a 600 square foot room in your house, you'd say, whoa, this is a big old room. But in a classroom, that's not very big. But for a high school classroom, 600 is a minimum size. 660 is a minimum size for middle school age. And 750 is the minimum size for K through 2. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking right now, well, that seems backwards. But this DOE is still a little bit behind times because typically over the years in a high school classroom, what's your environment like?
Structure.
It's more structured. Kids move in, they sit in their desk for the 50 minutes or 90 minutes or whatever schedule we're on, and they get up at the end and leave. That's the typical classroom, particularly when I went to school and when I taught. But now, it's not like that anymore. Matter of fact, I worked with North Georgia College for a little while in teacher education, and if I went in and saw a teacher, and they were sitting behind their desk or standing in front of the classroom lecturing the whole time, I didn't give them a very good evaluation. Because they need to move, the kids need to move, and so that's the environment now. There's more structure. My daughter's a high school AP chemistry teacher, and she has her kids constantly moving, not just on lab day, but through the rest of the time, through the other days too, as they look at demonstrations, they look at different things that's going on, they look at different learning stations throughout her classroom. And so she's constantly moving. A teacher has become more of a facilitator now than the lecturer. And so there needs to be more room, but 600 is the minimum. That's their guideline. Remember I said a while ago that when you have they have guidelines, but as a school system, if you determine what's adequate is more than that, then you go in that direction. I think that in your system, most of your high school classes are bigger than 600. And all your elementary classrooms are bigger than that too. At least, I won't say all of them because you do have one building that was built for high school back in the 70s.